Good afternoon and welcome to the Sam Lacrosse Show. Happy Monday to everybody. 1 year ago this upcoming Saturday, I walked out of a $400,000 corporate tech sales job and into the unknown. For the past 4 years, and for the previous 4 before that, I had oriented my entire life on curating what I had called a quote-unquote successful career. When looking back on the 2016 version of me, he would have called it a smashing success. I had worked unbelievably hard to put myself in a position where I was making more in 1 year than most people in this country make in 8. I was a person of high regard and status, someone who people look to for guidance, leadership, and mentorship. I was noticed by executives in the company, getting the validation I had been missing for a good portion of my life, much less my career. I wined and dined big wigs at fancy restaurants. I went to Las Vegas every year to hear our Bond villain CEO talk about how he created the CIA and wanted to revolutionize vaccine technology using AI. I should have been happy, because 2016 me surely would have been. But I wasn't. The 2024 version of me saw something completely and totally different, mostly because he saw the world completely and totally different. When he looked at my career, I saw one that was built on insecurity, hollowness, and a very deep sense of unfulfillment. I had told myself for the longest time that I was building up a career for myself to set my future family up for the future. I was doing the quote-unquote right thing by putting my all into the corporate world, by making myself some type of leader of the new school, a big shot, someone people could envy. But that was a lie. The real reason why I poured so much of my soul into my corporate job was because I did it for me, as Walter White said. I spent my entire college career making myself quote-unquote bulletproof, deeply offended that people in my hometown didn't give me the respect I felt I was due, but never deserved in reality. I wanted other men to respect me, to bow at my feet. I wanted women to throw themselves at me sexually. I wanted older men to honor me and anoint me as the next big thing to cruise into a position of cushy C-suite leadership. And to be honest, I could have had all of those things. I certainly wanted them at the time, especially early on. I thought that if I maneuvered properly and worked hard enough, I could eventually become the CEO of the company I was working for, which is currently valued as the second biggest tech company in the entire world. But multiple things happened throughout that process that began to blur that vision, to make it less desirable over time. It was nothing I could have seen coming, but it came nonetheless. The first thing I realized was that I discovered that everything I thought I wanted through climbing the corporate ladder resulted in almost nothing but misery for those above me. The best piece of career advice that I give to people is the following. It's not enough to simply want the job of the person. That's easy. Everyone wants the fancy title you can post on LinkedIn, the accelerator compensation structure, and the luxurious travel and President's Club packages. Instead, what I advise the people who seek my counsel to ask is the following. Do you want the life of the person who has the job that you want? That's a much better question, because the job is merely an extension of who the person is holistically. As Jesus said, you should judge a tree by its fruits. Your job and your love and performance of and within it certainly fits that criteria. As I began to sink deeper into my golden handcuffs, as I got to understand how the sausage truly gets made inside of my company and inside of most companies, I realized something horrifying. I wanted none of the lives of my senior level leadership. Zero. Zilch. This was a startling thing to realize. Weren't these the people that should be envied, the ones everyone wants to be, the ones who supposedly have all the answers and have everything figured out? Well, as it turns out, the answer to those questions are all the same. No. To a person, the number of things that were horrifying about their existence far outnumbered the things that were enviable. Their marriages were in tatters. They had kids far too late. Their Slack bubble never went off of green. They had to schedule time to attend a family dinner for their niece's graduation. They hired full-time in-house nannies to raise their children while they worked upstairs off of Zoom. In short, they were miserable. Life was hard enough. I felt foolish to impose additional hardship for something as stupid as a yearly trip to Vegas. The second thing I realized was that all of the stuff that I thought was going to fill me up, the stuff that was going to get me respect from men and love from women, never achieved either. I once received nearly a greater than $120,000 post-tax bonus, one that I used to throw down a home at the young age of 26. I went to fancy and expensive restaurants. I quote-unquote networked, meaning merely that I went to places and downed old fashions to get people to think I was cool. I was a baller, at least in my own mind. But the thing that bothered me the most, no one cared. At all. It turns out that the more narcissistic you are, like me, the more you believe that people will pay attention to you, especially when you either lose or win big. But this is not the case at all, because the truth is that people really don't give that much of a rip about you, because they're too busy worrying about themselves. And nothing infuriated me more than this fact. If this was true, then what did I spend the last decade of my life getting to that place for exactly? The cold hard truth? Nothing. I had wasted the past decade of my life doing things not for myself with the sole purpose of elevating my status, of playing a stupid game with stupid people about how to stupidly achieve stupid goals. I angrily cried myself to sleep more nights than I can remember, more upset with myself than I'd ever been about how I completely pissed away my formative years. But the third thing, the thing that helped alleviate those first two things more than anything else, and the sole thing that changed my life beyond all comprehension or measure, was my conversion to Christianity. Jesus Christ is the only person that, at that point, had given me a convincing argument that I was playing a losing game, that for my own vice of self-sufficiency apart from him, I would never achieve anything but misery and pain, of which I was feeling abundantly. Jesus also convinced me that through my own self-centered striving tendencies, nothing would ever be enough. Everything runs out, including money and women, two things I thought could take care of my heart to prevent it from further injury. The only thing that doesn't? Jesus Christ. It took years of internal work, reflection, and bashing around from loving spiritual siblings and teachers for me to understand that and fully surrender my life completely. With that came my dreams, which were slowly turning into nightmares about life in the corporate world. Christianity was the straw that broke that camel's back of every single dream I had worked to achieve for nearly a decade. Nothing held up when put through the lens of a biblical worldview. It all melted away like it was nothing, a house not built on the rock, but on the sand. So given all of those factors, I decided to leave. The only issue was that I had nothing to leave to, no launch pad, no anything. Interestingly enough, however, I was able to find one in the form of Owen Samrone, the CEO of Unleash the Knowledge, who had reached out to me on a business opportunity after I'd published my now infamous first volume of the Scribe Media Files on my former and ironically current publisher. Samrone ensured that, if leveraged properly, my first book, Value Economics, could be the tip of the spear for a great business that could provide genuine impact. The only problem I had with anything he said was, at the time, I was broke. More than broke, actually. I had 5 maxed out credit cards, 0 savings, a loan out on my 401k, a back-breaking car payment, and outstanding book invoices that were crippling my finances. I had no money saved, and I would never dare to reach out for my parents to help. But thankfully, due to God's grace, that aforementioned $120,000 bonus, and more, by the way, hit just at the right time. I pushed all my chips in and went into business with Samrone, building out my first company, Value Economics Academy, in 3 months. I debuted it in December 2023 at the end-of-year conference for the Affluent Standard, which supercharged demand. I ended up scaling the business to over $100,000 in committed cash and revenue in 7 months and became Samrone's top client based virtually overnight. And I soon had the ammunition to leave. And leave I did. On July 26, 2024, I said goodbye to corporate America. It was a bittersweet day, because I genuinely liked many of the people I had worked with, most of whom had largely contributed to me making the amount of money in the first place. Yet, given all of this, I thought I was a shoo-in to succeed. I had a business that was booming, a media platform I loved, and a new home to build out a mothership, complete with a recently refurbished office, recording studio, and home theater. I was invincible, in my own mind. Or so I thought. As the great Mike Tyson once said, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face. It just so happens that when I stepped out of the corporate world, I got punched in the face, liver, nuts, and throat several times over. My entire network, save for an amount of people I could count on one hand, one that I had carefully cultivated over the past decade, completely disappeared over the course of a month. My income went to zero for nearly 6 months. And standing before you a year later, I can say that my business and the business that I created out of it are both gone, tossed into the ether, destroyed after a failed scaling attempt after imploding at just over $20,000 a month in revenue generated. After starting with much, 9 months later, I largely had nothing. Around April of this year, I was at a low point. My best friend had just committed suicide. I had given a de facto funeral to what I thought was going to be a value-centered movement at a mastermind I threw, which, to add insult to injury, was also overwhelmingly successful on the day that he committed suicide. I was actively filling out applications to become a police officer in one of my nearby towns. My sales skills, the only thing I thought I had a leg to stand on, were proven to be coddled trash, as shown in a humiliating sales call review that left me questioning whether I was good at anything at all. But yet here I am, still alive. I just released a book a month ago to moderate success. I'm still producing content, as you can see by this show. My life and God, more importantly, are still good. As I've opened up more about just how brutally hard this past year and this past 7 months in particular have been, many people have asked me the same question. Have you ever considered going back to corporate, asking for your old job back, networking in with another firm? Surprisingly to these people, and at times to myself, I've given them the same answer every single time. Absolutely not. Never once have I remotely considered going back to the corporate workforce. When my mom called me, for example, and asked if I needed financial assistance earlier this year, I frankly told her that I would rather chop my arm off and sell it for plasma than ask her for money. I would rather chop my other arm off than go back into corporate America. Even though these last 7 months have been far harder and potentially the hardest of my adult life than anything I'd ever experienced beforehand, I have no plans whatsoever to ever go back to where I came from. And I've begun to ask myself, what exactly is the root of this? Is it pride, stubbornness, me wanting to prove something to other people, much like before? Even though there are certainly elements of all three, those aren't the answer. The actual answer, the one that will define this issue, is simple. My life is far better when I'm not intertwined with the corporate world. As mentioned in my open letter to corporate America when I first left, we were in a very unloving marriage to begin with. I don't expect it to get better over time, or if I rejoin it. One of the biggest things that my faith has helped me with in this past year, and one of the biggest overarching lessons I've learned, is the following. No business, company, or sales job is my provider. God is my provider. Period. If I trust in God, even as He's taken more things away from me than ever before, I have faith that I'll come out okay. Do I believe it all the time? No. Do I spiral more than I should? Yes. But do I have overarching faith on whether or not this is true? Yes. And in actuality, I believe I'm in a good position, much better than I was before, if you can believe that. I'm currently helping an entrepreneur scale his company by helping build and scale his sales team. It's been a very challenging but rewarding process. I'm enjoying building my skill set and getting good at something again. I have plans for another business I'd like to start to build off my content, and based on all the investments in myself that I've made, the mistakes I've endured, and all the everything else that I've gone through, I think it's going to work. My health is great. My perspective is better tuned than ever. All things considered, I think I'm doing pretty good. We're going to be talking about many of these things and more in this episode. This is a topic I've long been encouraging people to think more about, and I figured there would be no better opportunity to do so than my 1-year quit-anniversary to do so. However, before we get into more specific details, there are 3 things that I've specifically learned over the last year after making the toughest decision of my life and quitting my corporate job to leap into the great unknown. I think they could be applicable and helpful to anyone, no matter where you find yourself. First, to leverage a quote from the great Thomas Sowell, there are no solutions, only trade-offs. More specifically, the most consequential trade-offs you make are when you trade one hard thing for another hard thing. For example, it's both hard to be in shape and to be obese. It's hard to be broke, and it's hard to get rich. It's hard to forge yourself into a person worth getting into a high-quality relationship, and it's hard to stay single. The same applies to my odyssey out of corporate America. It's very hard to be in golden handcuffs, and it's also hard to be free. I don't believe that I fully bought into life outside of the corporate world being easy, but I certainly did anticipate being just how badly, rather, it would strip me down to the studs. I didn't heed my own advice from my own book, which cost me a lot of time on rounding the curve in a proper fashion. This is a very useful thing to know, particularly if you're thinking about making a big decision that's supposedly a guaranteed option in your head. Nothing is guaranteed. Everything worth doing or not doing is hard. It's simply a matter of how you want to live and why you want to live that way. The key is discerning the why behind both and how you want to go about living in accordance to that. Second, I've learned that quote-unquote freedom is subjective. While words matter and have been the main thing that have led our societies decline alongside our abandonment of its values, the truth of the matter is that different people value different things. As Joey Badass said, freedom is exactly the same way. You need to think about it through a tremendous amount to discover what truly matters to you and why you are seeking the quote-unquote freedom that you want. Because, as Jocko Willink has said repeatedly, the only thing that leads to true freedom is thorough discipline. Without discipline, without architecting your lifestyle and reality to what you want, freedom decays into anarchy, which is good for no one. You must forge your freedom through an intense discipline and focus, something that very few people today possess. If you can't, you don't stand a chance. This involves 2 things, a defined endpoint and a defined map to get you there. You must know what you are driving at, or you will drive off a cliff. Equally as important, you must know exactly how you plan on getting there and have plans to pivot if, and more than likely when, they do not go exactly according to your perfectly designed plan. Which leads me to the third thing I learned throughout this past year after leaving my corporate job. Once you discover that endpoint, the X that marks whatever spot you're trying to reach, once success is completely and fully defined, everything in your life gets better. Everything. You will feel clarity that you've never felt, experience peace that you've never experienced, and have almost all of your doubts drop to zero. There is nothing more dangerous than a man on a mission. More accurately, there is nothing more dangerous than a man on a mission who has a mission. When those two things go hand in hand, you're unstoppable. Whether it's quitting a job you hate or moving to a new location or whatever goal you want to choose, the mission must be singular. You must shoot to kill and search and destroy. That thing for me was architecting my lifestyle outside of the corporate world for my future and family. While I don't believe that my trials are over by a long shot, I believe I've gotten through the worst part of the storm. As you go through this episode, do your best to learn from me. Maybe I can help prevent you from going through mine. I usually have ice cubes in this. My ice maker is not working. Well, no, it's not working, but it's producing ice at a very diminished rate, I will say. Okay. Okay, so I quit my job almost a year ago today, and that's largely really what has happened since that I discussed in my opening monologue. But I want to get deeper into the reasons why I actually made this decision, because I think the reasons are important. And I think because the reason I want to do this as well is I want to make this the least bit about myself as possible. I want to make it broader. I want to make it systemic. I want to make it about you, because you are not here to listen to me complain about my problems. That's not what the show is about. So if I do that, I believe I'm detracting from why people watch me in the first place. And also because I believe there is a renaissance of some sorts and a revolution happening right now. And I want to give people reasons to question things. That was honestly, it's interesting because it was given to me by a actually really unimpressive professor, but this was the most applicable piece of advice I feel like I ever got in college, was to learn to question things. And I believe that that's been very good advice, especially with kind of the way that the world has gone, because if you don't question everything, if you just get a narrative spoon-fed to you over and over again, you're going to be so dependent on other people's information that you'll never seek information yourself, which is a major issue and a major problem. And so I want, and I think this is particularly true, by the way, with the resume that I have and the background that I have with all people, because I went to a big state school. I was encouraged that, this is it, this is the way. As the Mandalorian said, everything like that. And I think a lot of people were kind of told the same narrative. And I think a lot of people are discovering that that's not true. I was listening to a Tim Dillon episode this morning, actually on my way back from working out. And he was kind of saying, there's a reason why, and I want to do a segment about the psychopath that's going to get elected to be the new New York City mayor, but with Zoran Mamdani. I think the reason why he got elected is, and if you look at the demographic, this is actually hilarious. If you look at the demographic of, who voted for this guy, it's all college-educated white people who are making over six figures. Why? Because they believe they've been gypped. They believe that they bought into this narrative and they did what they quote-unquote should have done, and now they're mad about it, and now they're like, going to No Kings protests and throwing stuff at police officers and things like that. So anyway, but I want to really get into the reasons why I left. And I think this can give a lot of people maybe some clarity, but also maybe some understanding and some empathy in terms of some things that they might be going through that I would think that they're probably in agreement with me. If they don't agree with necessarily all my positions, that's not what I'm talking about. But agreeing with the general ethos of everything is kind of what I want to hit home around. So the first reason why I left my corporate job is because of golden handcuffs. Golden handcuffs was probably the first reason that I left. I felt trapped in my own quote-unquote success, and I think a lot of people feel this way. Even like my boxing coach, Tyson Mendias, who was working at a government job out in California. He's making like a contracting job, I believe. He was just sitting in an office, basically making over six figures, and I think he said like one of his jobs was to go and like check the light bulbs of everything in the video or everything in the building, and then he could like leave by 12. And he's like, well, I could do this for the rest of my life, but I kind of want to move to Austin and start a boxing gym, which he did, and I'm glad that he did. So shout out to Archetype Boxing Club there. But I feel like this narrative of quote unquote success by corporate standards, it's really just mediocrity at the end of the day. And I think the reason why I know this, and I think why a reason a lot of people feel this, but maybe not admit it, is that it's ultimately when you're judging something, you have to have a comparable, you have to have a baseline, you have to have a metric in order to do this. And so when you're quote unquote doing well, the right question you should ask in terms of that is, okay, doing well compared to what? I'm doing well in this job. Okay, compared to what? And that is the question that no one can answer. No one can answer that question. Oh, I'm doing well compared to what? Like living in misery? Living well? In comparison to the guy who works in a factory, the person who has a job that pays a lot less but fulfills them up more than you do? Like, what is that? And so no one can answer this question, especially in the corporate world. No one can. But it is the most important question to answer strictly for the reason that if you cannot answer that question, you're probably not successful. You're probably not. Because mediocre people, if they believe they're doing well around other mediocre people, this was me as well, you're not doing all that well. You're just not. And so I think I was, and a lot of people are, they're drinking their own Kool-Aid. And they're listening too much to the siren song of, oh, you are making six figures. You are doing this. You are, a top G. You're a baller. You got promoted recently. It's like, okay, fine, cool. Compared to what? Compared to what? Like, are you happy? Are you fulfilled? Are you doing something that matters? Are you doing well at the staring down the barrel of a gun? Like what is that? And so no one asks the deep introspective questions because I believe they don't want to, because I think everyone knows this. I think everyone knows this, if we're being dead honest about it. So I think that's why a lot of people are really, I would say, apprehensive about leaving. And that's kind of why I left. I kind of felt that kind of creep come into me over time, and that was not a good feeling. And so I was like, okay, I need to probably get out of this, and I did, which is a good decision, I think, at the end of the day. So the second reason is that corporate America is hostile to values, particularly traditional and religious values. And I was getting into this conversation. I was in Dallas a couple weeks ago with my friends Hafiz Bayoku and Stephen Jaworski. We were talking about this, and I thought this is a really interesting conversation. I might do a whole episode on this, about this whole concept of neutrality or finding the middle or moderation when it comes to value-driven conversations across everything about political issues, cultural issues, whatever you want to call them. And over time, and I think this really got clear when I was talking with, Stephen and Hafiz are both very smart people. And so I was talking with the two of them, and I've realized over time that the whole quote-unquote neutral spaces argument is just complete and utter crap. It's nonsense when you look at it. There are no neutral spaces. And I was raised, and my dad believed this, everyone else believed this. It's not my dad's fault, but that's just kind of the narrative that he believed. And I was raised in an area or with a worldview that essentially said, hey, some places are neutral. You cannot talk about X, Y, and Z inside of these places. So for example, in business, what I was told is you cannot talk about politics and religion inside of corporate America. They do not tolerate those conversations. Okay, what about all the pride parades and things that companies do inside of their things? What about they celebrate Pride Month? Well, what is that? That's an affront to my religion and to my values and to my politics. So they can have that conversation, but I can't. Black History Month, and by the way, I'm a fan of Black History Month, but Black History Month, Martin Luther, like everything like Women's History Month, like all of these things are taking a value-driven stance. And so really, this is the under-conflict of every conflict. The undercurrent of every conflict is a war of values. And corporate America is no different, by the way. So they are going to fight for their values, by the way, as they should, because no one is neutral when it comes to values. Nobody is neutral when it comes to their values. Let's just start there, and let's move from that point. But I've realized over time, and Tucker Carlson's talked about this, and other people have talked about this, but if people say that they love something, but they say, I want to change everything fundamental about that something, they probably don't love that something. They probably don't. And corporate America is no different. And the reason I realize this is because The second I knew that they hated my values is because they made every point to change them. They drug me into HR meetings. I got yelled at by my superiors. Basically everything in terms of I was singled out multiple times. Literally my first day of work, I was singled out for having an American flag in my background, all that sort of thing. And it made me feel alienated, made me feel isolated, and it made me want to leave because I felt like hardly anyone understood me. Like no one stood up for me. No one said, hey, this is, wrong, and I feel bad about this, whatever. So for anyone, by the way, who's listening to this, who don't drink the neutral spaces Kool-Aid, please. It's just not true. It's just not true because neutral spaces, they just don't exist. No one is ever neutral. No one is neutral. And people are programmed, and people are, definitely drink the Kool-Aid way too much, as I mentioned earlier, and they adopt values, but no one is neutral. No institution is neutral, nor should they be neutral. But one thing I would like is just an honest conversation about that. And corporate America is not willing to have that conversation. No institution is willing to have that conversation. No person is willing to have that conversation. But as value-driven people, I believe that we should have that conversation. And the third thing, speaking of being programmed, ironically, is Andrew Tate gets a lot wrong about a lot of things. Gets a lot more wrong than he does right, in my estimation. But one thing, I think the most right thing that Andrew Tate has ever said, nothing to do with women or OnlyFans or dating apps or masculinity or whatever. I think a lot of stuff that he says in that department is stupid. But the one thing that Andrew Tate, I think, gets right more than anything is that the hardest thing you can do in this world that we have constructed today, what he calls the Matrix, and he's not exactly wrong in that either, is to become a free and sovereign person. The hardest thing you can do is to be a free individual, a sovereign person. I like that word a lot better because sovereign means you control your life to a large degree. And you can't control some things, but you control a lot of things that you can control. You can't control the weather. You can't control what God thinks, obviously. But this is the biggest thing that really stuck out to me when I left is that you realize how intertwined and how entangled and how wired that you are to the corporate structure. So you realize how hard it is to escape when you're actually out because your health insurance is tied in there. Your 401k match is tied in there. A lot of people stop investing. The structure of your day, your salary, everything else. And you realize how much you get from your company and how much they are able to pass on to you. And I think honestly, that is probably what scares most people when they're thinking about leaving their job is because of something like that. People aren't afraid to leave because of anything rational, because as we've mentioned throughout this entire segment, we've been talking about this. There is every logical reason to leave your job in many ways for many people. And I'm not saying everyone should leave their job and do what I did. Not a lot. I think most people shouldn't do that, but some people should. But the reason they don't is because of irrationality, of fear. They're afraid. And I was afraid to leave. And I think the most slept on version of that fear is because they know they can't handle their freedom well. They're so used to support from institutions. I remember I was talking to Abigail Schreier about this a couple months ago, and she said a remarkable number of people my age, around mid-20s and old Gen Z, young millennial, those type of folks, are still getting financial assistance from their parents. And I just couldn't believe that. But that's the reality of the situation. Like most people, if they had to be free, if they had to provide for themselves, they had to go out and seek work and develop skills and everything like that, they couldn't do it. They just couldn't do it. And I think that's a very, very scary thing, but it's a very honest thing. And so if that's you, really do a hard assessment about it. If you're thinking of leaving your job, as I did, think about how you would do, actually, if you had to buy health insurance, if you had to sustain yourself financially, if you had to do everything, like I have to pay my mortgage and do all that kind of thing. How would you do? Ask yourself that question honestly. I don't think a lot of people do. And that's the reason why a lot of people are afraid, because they know they can't handle their freedom, and that's why a lot of people fail to do so and then fail to leave. But I did leave. That's the crux of this matter. And the reason why I left is because, again, I got a sense of how the sausage is made inside of the corporate world. And I did not like it. And I want to make sure I frame this properly, because I don't want to sound like a leftist in terms of saying Occupy Wall Street and everything, although I think the Occupy Wall Street folks had some points, but oh my gosh, the corporate world, capitalism, et cetera, et cetera. I'm a fan of capitalism. I'll say that from the jump. I like McDonald's as much as the next guy, or maybe not as much as the next guy anymore. So because of RFK or maybe things like that. But anyway, I like a lot of corporate things. But a lot of people bash and complain about corporate America. And I think this is largely for a good reason. But I think the problem with all of these folks and their arguments that they make is that they're not specific enough. They paint with a broad brushstroke and they say this, that, or whatever about corporate America. They don't get into the weeds and discuss what the actual problems are. And I think that there is a much more pointed argument about the corporate world that we're not having. And I think what's interesting is that you can't really see the forest through the trees when you're in the belly of the beast. Because, obviously I said earlier, I'm a year removed from being in that structure. And I think as I've been away and as I've kind of still interacted with people in my old company or people who are in different types of jobs or things like that, I think from a distance, I can see a lot better and I can see a lot clearer what is actually going on the inside as I've left it over the past year, because I just didn't see it because I was so in it, close to it, whatever you want to call it. And this is where I think Vivek Ramaswamy made a really great point about this in his first book called Woke Inc. It came out 4 years ago now, which is it's a great book, and I think Vivek is a really smart guy and one of my favorite people in politics right now. I wish I lived in Ohio strictly because I wanted him to be my governor. I think he'd be great, and he's going to do great. But Ramaswamy makes this point about the managerial class, quote unquote. And he says that is the problem. And he later translated this as he ran for president and created Doge, about the deep state and about the bloat inside of the federal government. But he was talking about this in a private sector version of this. So this is his argument he makes about the managerial class. That basically there is a bloat of middle employment and middle management inside of a company. Like when Elon Musk went into Twitter and cut 80% of the staff and the app actually worked better in some ways. People are like, oh my gosh, why is that? And he's like, they didn't need to be there. They didn't have real jobs. I would make that argument at my old company all the time. I would literally ask people does this person have a fake job? Why are they even employed here? What do they do? And no one could tell me most of the time. They just have a job to have a job, which is, no company should have 140,000 people working for it. I'll just put it that way. That's insane to me. Even a global company, 140,000 people, there's no way. There's absolutely no way. And I think Jordan Peterson, I don't know if he did this study, he was talking about this, I believe, with Michael Schellenberger at one point, but I think he said 60% of managers are a net negative to their company. They don't do anything. They actually bring the productivity of the company down. So if every company that is operating at this scale, they slash 60% of their management positions, they would become better and more efficient. And I think that that's true. I've seen that happen multiple times. And I think this is why small businesses are so effective and why their margins are better and why they can live better lives than most people. And, that's the reality of running a small business in large part. But so I was wondering, why is this? And Vivek, I don't think goes into this argument, and that's his prerogative, whatever. But I was wondering why this was. And I realized this when I had a call with my dad. I'll talk about that in a second. But the reason why these people are actually there is because of one reason. And it's nothing to do with their performance, nothing to do with how well they do their job, nothing to do with any of that stuff. They're only there because of loyalty. People like to say in the corporate world that, oh, we reward hard work here. We reward merit here. No, you don't. No, you don't. You reward loyalty, kneeling before the crown. That is what gets people promoted. That's what gets people into middle management, that cushy position where they can slowly decay inside of their office chair for the next 30 years of their career. That's how that works. It's not because of people who want to create change, quote unquote, inside of the corporate structure. It's not. And that's a lie to say that. It's about loyalty. And I knew this when I called my dad after, Because a big reason that kind of led to this whole odyssey of me leaving was that I had a person in my leadership structure who was very good at what they did, and they told me to my face that they'd never promote me. They would never promote me. And I remember I called, and this was a person that had been very supportive of me for a very long time and said, like, I want to see you do well, I want to see this, want to see whatever. And I called my dad after that because I was just very confused. And he kind of said, like, hey, they don't like that you think this way. They don't like that you publish books. They don't like this article or this podcast thing or whatever. And I realized in that moment, because I was a very good performer inside the corporate structure. I brought in $9 million in sales revenue in 3 years. And I realized that all of their claims of hard work, skill, merit, etc., those were a psyop. They were an op. And so what they're actually looking for, if you're looking, by the way, if you want to stay in the corporate job, but your corporate world and you're looking to get promoted, this is what you need to do. You need to be loyal. You need to do whatever your management tells you to do. No deviation. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. No, sir. No, ma'am. Every single day. And you'll probably be in for a promotion relatively quickly. What they are looking for is soldiers, boots on the ground, jack boots. Because anything outside of that power structure is a threat to them. And they know that. They know that. Which is why they hold up that structure. Because the truth about the corporate world is that they and it, the structure, believes that they're far more impressive than they are. They lie to themselves, as I mentioned earlier, about their own impressiveness. And most of them are mediocre. Like, as I mentioned, when I left, my sales skills got so much better. And I don't want to make this, just a riff on my trainers or whatever, because my trainers were fine people for the most part. But you are so, and I'll get to this in a second, but it's just there's levels. There's levels to this stuff. And so what people that are kind of holding up a corporate structure believe is they have elevated themselves to a certain level of power, prestige within the structure that is almost completely undeserved for almost all of them because of that loyalty perspective. They have been so loyal that they've been rewarded and elevated for that, and especially the ones who are already at the top of the mountain because they have allowed that structure to persist. They have not differentiated from that playbook one iota, like at all. And so for all corporate employees who leave, I've seen this with multiple people, and I've went to in the creator economy route. People have went to startups, people have went to other jobs, people have went to, et cetera, a bunch of other things. So for all corporate employees who leave this structure, especially those who are around my age, so around, again, Gen Z, millennial, maybe not so much millennial anymore, younger millennial, but Gen Z specifically, who leave that structure, especially, again, those who are around my age, you realize how coddled you've been, how unskilled you actually are. I was not good at sales. And I closed $9 million in sales revenue. What does that tell you? I was not good. I was protected. Because there is an old saying that I've been really honing in on and studying and focusing on recently, is that the goal of any system is to protect itself. The goal of the human body is to protect the human body. The goal of a corporate structure is to protect the corporate structure. The goal of the government is to protect the government. The role of a church is to protect that church. No outside agents, no pathogens, no anything gets inside. The corporate world is no different than that. The goal of any system is to protect the system, to protect itself. So, one of the biggest closeted reasons as to why more people don't leave is because they know they can't handle it. They know exactly how weak and how unskilled they are across a varying number of domains that you need to be successful and to be valuable outside of the structure. They know that they cannot exist outside of the structure. They need the structure to protect themselves. They need that structure to give them a false sense of security, to give them validation, to give them comeuppance as to how good they are, to tell them how good they are, to affirm them. But they shouldn't be, and I shouldn't have been, because I wasn't that good at what I did, and I didn't know how bad I was until I left. And a lot of people know that they're not good. A lot of people don't know that they're not, or know that they're bad, particularly the people in the managerial class, the middle managers, the SVPs, the GVPs. Like, by the way, why do we have 4 VPs, by the way, and some more structures? Stupid. But the senior managers, that's another one of my favorite titles. These people they kind of suck, honestly. Like, they're not good. And that's why they don't leave. If they were so good, why wouldn't they leave? That's why. That's why. They know how bad they are. They know how unskilled they are. And they know if they leave, they'll get clapped. And that's okay. I just want an honest conversation about it is all. So I want to take this argument one step further because, as I mentioned in my monologue, and I've mentioned throughout these episodes and a couple times I try to talk about it as much as I do, I am of the opinion, I want to take this argument one step further about the corporate world. I don't just believe that corporate culture is bad, even though I largely do. I believe that it's demonic. I believe that it's also anti-Christian, anti-Christ at its core. Now, I will profess this before you click off this video. I am a Bible-thumping evangelical Christian. I am not ashamed of that at all. I like the Bible. I like evangelical Christianity. That's what I am. And I will speak in those terms. And everything that I look through is framed in those terms. So feel free, by the way, if you're by the way, I Muslim, Jew, whatever, like that's, whoever, Hindu, please stay on this video. Like, I don't want to exclude you from this conversation, but this is just my perspective where I'm coming from. So anyone who doesn't believe what I do, please take this with a grain of salt, even though I would strongly encourage you to become a Christian if you're not one. But feel free to take this with a grain of salt. But I believe that there is genuine truth in this argument about the demonic corporate structure verse. Because I believe there's something that's deeply wrong and really perverse about the way that this whole system operates and is set up. And I think there's evidence to prove that, actually, because, we've all heard, well, maybe not all of us, but some of us have heard the verse. Jesus says you can't serve God and money. Paul writes to Timothy, love of money is the root of all evil, everything like that. And so, Jesus is not anti-money. Christianity is not anti-money. Poverty gospel is just as bad as prosperity gospel. There is no qualifier for the gospel, for those who are curious. The gospel is the gospel. There should be no amplifier to that. The gospel is enough. So anyone who tells you that God's going to give you a Lamborghini if you read the Bible and do all the things that Christians, quote unquote, should do, like that's ridiculous. And everyone who tells you that if you don't do what they're going to say, you're going to be poor, that's also bad. But on this point about you cannot serve more than one master, you can't serve God and money, and the love of money is the root of all evil, that's idolatry. The reason why I think that this is applicable to the corporate world and why I think the corporate world is demonic and evil and satanic is corporations are driven by profits. And I want to say this is a good thing because I believe, honestly, most of them, even though they're filled with largely unimpressive people, they could probably replace the government if they could. Like if I gave you, for example, what's more powerful, OpenAI or the U.S. government? Google or the U.S. government? I'd probably pick the private sector, to be honest. I'd probably pick Sam Altman right now, even though I like the current administration, a lot of what the current administration's doing. I mean, it's just the efficiency of everything and how they operate and the amount of people that they employ that are smarter than some of those people. I think, because we saw what Facebook did with Cambridge Analytica back in the 2016 election and everything like that. Corporations, in many ways, are more powerful than the government, in many ways. But, and I believe that we should keep them out of the government and keep them private sector private, public sector public. I think this whole thing with Palantir is really shady. Like everything that's going on with this interplay of like the tech bros into the Trump administration, I think that's all incredibly suspect. And I think if you're not suspect of that, you might need to check your blindness on this. But the goal of a corporation is money at all costs to provide value to shareholders. That was the Milton Friedman argument. That's the free market capitalism argument. But what I want to challenge that with is if this is true, if this is the end all be all, which to many people it is, where does this exactly lead us to if they're not guided by things like morality, for example, righteousness, values? I think that's a good question. And no one asked that question. And everyone has, like you walk into like any like insurance, like you walk into a State Farm, for example, and there's going to be like a picture of like our values here, whatever. And so, but they're really not value-driven institutions, even though they have values, not those values. So, and I think when you look at too, all of the wealthiest companies in the world, the companies, the biggest market caps, like the Amazons, the Google, etc., you will realize actually that the center of their focus, the center of their actual value system, the one that you will never hear them say out loud, you have to kind of look through them to see, is anti-anything value-oriented at all. They're transhumanist. Mark Zuckerberg says, hey, we want to develop friends so humans aren't lonely, so we're going to create friends out of AIs or something, whatever ridiculous thing that is. They're anti-family. They're anti-marriage. They're anti-children. Why is that? Because they're demonic. They're evil. They're satanic. They are focused on taking the best parts of humanity, family, humans, marriage, kids, religious faith, etc., and perverting them in the name of money. Well, we're going to do this policy. We're going to institute this because we need to provide value to our shareholders. And I don't really care if you miss every single one of your kids' soccer games. I really don't care if your marriage falls apart. I really don't care that, you work 16 hours a day and you never go to church because, we got a job to do. They make work an idol. And I want to say as well, I believe many people inside of corporations are against this behavior. Like, I do believe that. But they are not willing, this is the key part, they are not willing to break their own golden handcuffs to stand up for their own values and their own sense of common sense and be ousted by the tribe. They're not willing to be on the outs with what they have. They like that cushy desk. They like that promotion. They like that salary cap. They like that stock option bonus. And who wouldn't, by the way? Stability's nice. I'm not against stability at all. I like stability. It's why I'm a conservative. It's why I'm a Christian. But it's the reason why this has been allowed to happen is because people have allowed it to happen, including me when I was in the corporate world. And that's why I left after only a couple of years. And I think when you look at all of this and you say, okay, when was the last time they had a pro-marriage, pro-family, no one in the top levels of success is for that. Nobody. The products they make aren't for that. Mark Zuckerberg, we was talking about him a couple seconds ago. It's all software and SaaS and it's all stuff that takes you away from the permanent things, the actual things, the real things, the value-driven things. And I think there's a sense that a lot of people don't like that, and they shouldn't like that because it's anti-them, right? It's anti what most people genuinely want. And again, it is this sense of complacency and this buying into the lie of a neutrality of values that corporations and people like them or things like them, institutions like them. This is why the world has gotten into so much trouble. Because if there is no assistance to evil than good, value-driven people sitting around and doing nothing. If you want evil to flourish, if you want anti-human things to creep into the human lexicon and creep into the culture, there is no better assistance to that than if you are a value-driven person and you do nothing but sit around and wait for something to come and save you and wait for someone to tell your boss that you can take a couple hours back to go to your kid's basketball game or go on a date night with your wife or volunteer with your church or give you a raise that matches the pace of inflation. And this is a more complicated argument than this, honestly, obviously. And I'm not even saying that you need to do what I did and quit your job. But what I am saying is that if you don't bring your values into the workplace, you are going to be programmed out of your values. I've seen this happen more times than I can count. You need to fight against this. You need to fight against the thing that is oppressing you. Do not take their nonsense. Do not submit. Do not buy in to their perverse sense of values. If you are a value-driven person, hear me in this. Do not comply. Do not buy in. Do not do what they are telling to do if it goes against your values. If it violates your values, tell that person to scram. Tell that institution they can hire somebody else. Leave your job if that's the case. If they will not bend to that, the most powerful asset of any company, any corporation, anything inside of the world is people. They don't have people. They don't have a business. They don't. So don't be afraid. Don't be a coward. Because if you're a coward, you have no shot at winning. And unfortunately, that's why a lot of people don't have a shot at winning. I just realized my ring light's off, by the way. I hope the lighting of this is not bad. The lighting outside, I have my dry erase board like right in front of my wedding. Jeez, I'm a mess this morning. Boy, I just took all my thumbnails and my collar up. I'd fix that in the thing. This is boy. Well, been a rush this morning. So all of this has led, I think, to a lot of frustration among a lot of people in the workplace, a lot of people in the corporate space. And a lot of people have told me, like, hey, I wish I had the balls to do what you did and quit my job. And a lot of people, I think, are believing that. Like, I want to change. I want to uproot my life and uproot my career and do something different or start a company or do another job or whatever. And I think that's great. And that might be true. But before you do that, what I would recommend, I think there are some things to think about. And I thought about some of them, but I didn't think about all of them to any stretch of the imagination. There were a lot I did not think about, and that bit me in the butt real bad. And so what I want to do now is, like, looking back on it, these are the three things that I would want to most emphasize in terms of assessing whether you should actually quit your job or whether you should stick it out. I thought about some of these things, not necessarily in depth, but I thought about some of them. And I think that these are helpful to some people, and hopefully they'll be helpful to you. But the first thing is, I want to frame these in questions. The first question you need to ask: Are you compromising your values, both inside and outside of work? This is the biggest question you need to answer if you're thinking about leaving your job. And this is the most evident one right off the bat. You should be able to tell this in 2 seconds if you're really honest with yourself. Because your conscience can't lie to you. Your conscience is a gift from God. It's what separates us from the animals. If you believe that you are compromising your values, if you feel that you are compromising your values both in and outside of the workplace, if you believe that something is controlling your mind and compelling you to say something or do something that is not aligned with your values, and you automatically feel those things, whether you want to or not, you should listen to your conscience and you should leave your job. Because doing things by force or making people feel that you need to do things by force in order to reach a certain level of enlightenment or a certain level of status or whatever, that's never going to work, ever. And if your company is de facto forcing you to do some things and thinks thoughts that are not aligned with your values, you need to leave. Like right now or yesterday, preferably yesterday. But today's a good day. If it's not yesterday, make it today. Second question. Are the temporary things replacing the permanent things? The permanent things is a concept I've talked about a lot on this show. Russell Kirk, the great philosopher, said the permanent things are the things you need to focus on. Family, religious community, your neighbors, everything like that. So are you finding yourself having greater pleasure with your job or with your family, religious community, friendships, your health, etc.? Which one is it? It's one of the two. You either value one versus the other more. There is no neutrality. Remember, you cannot value things at the same level. That's not how values work. That's anti-values, actually. So Chris Williamson has this great quote: do not sacrifice the thing you want for the thing that's supposed to get it. Do not sacrifice your family, religious community, friendships, health for a job to then spend time with your family, religious community, friendships, health, etc. That's not how things work. It's hustling backwards. It's a bad strategy. Again, you should be able to tell this thing relatively quickly. And I would recommend that you get to the bottom of that relatively quickly, because if you are, quit your job. Quit. That's not worth it. It's not. I've seen, and I bet you have, by the way. You've seen a lot of people make that mistake. I've seen a lot of people make that mistake. I've made that mistake more times than I would like to admit. It's not worth it. Never is. Third question you need to ask: do you find yourself genuinely wanting to stay or just feeling like you can't leave? Big question there. This is the golden handcuffs trap. The golden handcuffs trap is when you feel, again, compelled to stay versus whether you want to stay. You don't have to do anything. I say this on sales calls all the time. You don't have to do anything. A lot of people say, I have to do this for my family. I have to do this for my wife. I have to do this for my... Do you have to, though? Do you have to? Or do you just feel that you can't? And this should be the final straw if those two others are tripped. If you go 3 for 3 here, leave your job yesterday. Quit. Leave. Do something else. Get a job in a trade. It's better for the country. It's better for you. You'll probably find more purpose working with your hands anyway. If the answer is the second part of the question, feeling like you just can't leave, if I leave, something bad will happen to me, you should leave. You need to leave, I would argue. However, if the answer is the former, if you find yourself genuinely wanting to stay, and by the way, this is the third one, so if you did not trip the other two, you should focus on the other two before this. You should probably try to stay in and make it work, if at all possible. But if your values are sacrificed, if you feel like you're sacrificing the permanent things, you should probably leave. And I would recommend that you leave. Sacrifice your values, sacrifice the permanent things, sacrifice your ability and your sovereignty. Those three are tripped, leave your job. Leave it today. Don't make some sort of a plan, but don't overthink it. If not, make it work, because not everyone's supposed to leave. We need people in corporate jobs. Fine with that. But if you can leave, leave. I think you'll find it better on the other side. Thanks for watching, everyone. Own the day. Open your mind. See you next week.